Hey guys, this is the second of two lessons on the Australian wildfires. The first lesson is on the causes of the fires, and this lesson is on the impacts of those wildfires. You're going to be successful at the end of this lesson if you can describe the impacts of the wildfires in detail, and maybe also spot some trends in some graphs or on maps. As always, geography links to your employability. Have a look at some of the examples of where this knowledge might link to a future career. Let's get started. To sort out what an impact is in geography, we need to sort them into one of three categories. The first category is environmental. That's anything to do with environmental damage or change. For example, if an area of animal habitat is destroyed, we'd put notes in this column. Social is to do with people or people's lives being affected. For example, if a house is destroyed, this would be a social impact, and we'd put it in this column. And economic is a little like social, but more specifically directed at a country or a community's ability to do business and to make money. And for example, if a business is burned down in the fires, that would be an impact we put in this column. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of video clips and then some pictures, and you need to make sure that your table is as full as possible with different impacts that are environmental, social, and economic. Let's watch this quick clip for starters.
People don't really understand it until you actually see it coming at you in a wall of flame. Everything is so dry here, and it's been drying out for 2 years, so it's very volatile. And of course we have the eucalyptus, which is in the air. It's volatile too, so it just explodes. It's very, very terrifying. The fire still came at us, even though we were very well prepared. There were over 200 firefighters here from various areas in Australia that were helping us to fight the fires. The lack of water, of course, is a big problem, so we had to ship in water tanks, etc., to actually deal with it. And people were using blowers to blow back the sticks and the grass and clear the area, but it didn't make any difference with this fire. It's like fireballs in the air that explode. Cars blowing up before the fire even gets near. It's unprecedented. We've had, loss of life at our little community, and we're all devastated by this.
Okay, so hopefully you've got a few impacts of the fires by watching that video. Things like trees being destroyed, cars blowing up, houses being destroyed, farm livestock being lost, and people having to move away from the area. Let's watch this next clip to find out even more.
Now, what's happening in Australia is unprecedented. The bushfires have killed 18 people. They've killed close to 500 million animals. They're over twice as big as the Amazon forest fires, and they're exerting extreme political pressure on Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Earlier, he was heckled in Cobargo in New South Wales. There, 2 people have died and many homes have been lost. The Guardian has compared its main street before and after the fires, and its residents wanted to talk to the Prime Minister.
You're out, son. You are out. Not here. Fine. Come.
About the people who what about the people who have nowhere to live?
And here he is meeting another angry resident who wants to talk about more support for the Rural Fire Service.
How are you?
I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS. So many people here have lost their homes.
We need some help.
We need more help.
As the Prime Minister shaking a woman's hand and then walking away as she continued to talk about the help her community needs. He then encountered a firefighter who was equally unenthused at the idea of shaking his hand. Well, after these encounters, Scott Morrison said he wasn't surprised that people are feeling very raw. And certainly this crisis is bringing incredible pressure on many Australians. Here are some of the most recent pictures. These are from Victoria, and you can see the scale of not just the fires, but the volume of smoke that's being generated. Many of these are so big, they're even forming their own weather events, which can then generate lightning, which then in turn sparks more fires. These pictures released by firefighters in New South Wales again show us the extreme conditions in which these men and women are working. I've also got these pictures from a small town in New South Wales called Mogo. The devastation is all but complete. And because of all of this, thousands of Australians have decided they need to leave the areas affected, in part because conditions are predicted to worsen over the weekend with more high temperatures and more strong winds. Because of all of this, New South Wales has declared a week-long state of emergency. That is partly because of the calculation that the threat level is likely to increase rather than decrease. Another way of viewing the scale of this is this satellite image, which shows you the volume of smoke spreading across much of the state. Or you can look at the crisis in terms of figures. The Amazon bushfires of last year burned through 900,000 hectares. The California wildfires of 2018 went through 800,000 hectares. In just New South Wales in Australia, more than 4 million hectares have been burnt in the last 6 months. That's brought devastating human costs and devastating environmental costs too. Ecologists at the University of Sydney are estimating 480 million animals have been killed by these fires. Koalas have been terribly affected. 8,000 are estimated to have died. To put that in context, that's around 1/3 of the koala population in New South Wales. So let's hear more from Australians who have been caught up in this story.
The fireball just came through at about 80k an hour, hit the house, and then we ran into the lake, and all the embers and everything were hitting us, burnt our hair a little bit, and we were in there for about an hour before we got rescued.
Something like that stares you in the face. It's very frightening. So I'd like to thank everybody that has done something for me.
I think someone's dropped a bomb on us, basically. That's what it feels like.
So here you have Cobargo on the coast, move north in the direction of Sydney, and you'll come to a town called Conjola, also in New South Wales. The BBC's Shaima Khalil is there.
The extent of the damage that these huge fires have caused here in Lake Conjola is all around. Homes have been ravaged. The earth is scorched, still smoldering, still hot. You can feel the smoke. 3 people died in the small community alone, one of them just up the street over here. This is one of the coastal towns where tourists have been given 48 hours to evacuate. Many of them have been trying to get out. It's been very hard for them to leave because the conditions around us are still quite hazardous. Residents are still in shock at what happened to their town. Some have left when the fires hit. Others stayed to defend their homes.
We could see it coming, and then it was jumping from house to house. We had nearly 8 houses on a line. You know, did we sort of cheat it that we survived? Yeah, it's pretty traumatic.
It's one resident of Conjola, and this image was photographed in his town. It's been featured on many front pages around the world and was taken by the photojournalist Matthew Abbott. He tweeted, "My last day of the decade felt like the apocalypse. I've been covering the fires for the last 6 weeks, but I haven't seen anything like yesterday's fire that decimated the town of Conjola." He's been speaking to the BBC.
I came down the main street and this one house was on fire. There was lots of neighbours trying to put the house out, trying to remove garbage bins that were melting and trying to protect their own properties with hoses. It's a dangerous job. There are times when, you kind of wondering, should I go down this road or should I hold back? But, it's very important for photographers to be able to be there and see these things as they happen. And, this image is probably, is testament to that. It's being seen around the world, and it gives an idea of just how serious this current crisis is for Australians.
There's Conjola on the map. It goes south, and you get to the coastal town of Malakuta in Victoria. People there have had to take shelter on the beach. They did so on New Year's Eve. Incredibly, this image was taken during the daytime. You may well have seen this image widely shared of an 11-year-old boy steering his family to safety in a boat there. And we know that dozens of homes have already been destroyed in this town, and it's also becoming hard to get help into the people who are there. There's only one road in Malakuta that gets you in and out, and it's cut off. That means thousands of people are trapped. And that also means the Australian Navy is starting to work on getting people out by boat.
So we have the opportunity today to potentially move about 500 people out of Malakuta. The interesting thing about it at the moment is some people may not want to leave. They may want to stay in there with their four-wheel drives and their caravans until such time as they may be able to get out by road. That could be a number of weeks. That could be 2 to 3 weeks at this stage.
Now, meteorologists will always tell you it's impossible to link a specific extreme weather event with climate change. They're not so reticent, though, when talking about temperatures in Australia across the last century, coming from 1910, warmer and warmer and warmer, in particular increases in the last 25 years. And these long-term temperature increases are connected to climate change, which in turn is caused by human activity. And we know there have been record temperatures throughout these weeks when the bushfires have spread, all of which means some Australians argue the fires are a moment of reckoning. Bridget Delaney is a journalist with Guardian Australia. She says maybe these fires will be Australia's Sandy Hook, Parkland moment. We urge the government to do something, and if they don't create a meaningful climate policy after this epic, destructive summer, they probably never will. Now, we've seen this view widely shared, the idea that if this doesn't shift the debate, perhaps nothing will. Well, we'll have to see. But the government so far has yet to move an inch on its climate policies. And the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, might argue he doesn't need to. He says he's already acknowledged the link between reducing emissions and reducing the risks of bushfire seasons like this one. It's worth remembering, though, Mr Morrison's deputy said of arguments linking these bushfires to climate change that they were the ravings of some pure, enlightened and woke capital city greenies. And he's still the Deputy Prime Minister. The Prime Minister also argues that Australia is keeping its side of the bargain on climate change. Here's more from him on this.
What we will do is ensure that our policies remain sensible, that they don't move towards either extreme, and stay focused on what Australians need for a vibrant and viable economy, as well as a vibrant and sustainable environment. Getting the balance right is what Australia, I think, has always been able to achieve. But right now, the focus, as I said at the outset, is to fight these fires and to get people to safety.
So the Prime Minister is talking about balance. Let's add a little more context to that. Australia is the world's third largest exporter of fossil fuels. You can see Russia, Saudi Arabia 1 and 2, Australia third, and the majority of those fossil fuel exports are coal. In 2018, Australia exported $42 billion worth of coal, and of course fossil fuels are an enormous contributor to global warming. But, as the Prime Minister alluded to, they also create lots of jobs. Around 50,000 workers in Australia are connected to the fossil fuel industry, and we know that around 60% of Australia's electricity comes from coal-fired power stations. Indeed, last year, a new coal mine was approved in Queensland. But the way that Australians are calculating their emissions is also being challenged more broadly. This is all part of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. The government says it's not doing anything wrong, but the woman who created the Paris Accord, a former French government minister, has said that actually, if the Australians are continuing to count as they do, this is just cheating. So there are extreme pressures again coming on Australia and its approach to this issue. Now, the hottest temperatures on record in Australia, unprecedented bushfires. You might think this was a guaranteed lead story in the Australian news media. It is for some. Here's the Sydney Morning Herald, escaping the red zone as its headline. But here we have the Australian newspaper, owned by Rupert Murdoch, known to lean to the right politically. Its main picture is about horse racing. Its main story is about a yet-to-be-confirmed proposal to restrict alcohol sales in Western Australia. can see the bushfires are positioned here on the left. And we saw something similar before Christmas too. On the day after Australia's highest temperatures on record, the Australian led with Asia's coal hunger to lift exports. More evidence that these fires, and more broadly climate change and how they're covered in the media, are profoundly political in Australia. The conclusions people draw about what's causing these current bushfires will impact on how Australians view climate change, how they view their fossil fuel industry, how they want their economy to be structured. And that's why the media, politicians, the people are all paying close attention, not just to what's happening, but the conclusions that are drawn. Here's more on that point from Latika Berg, correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald, based here in London.
Okay, so I'm going to pause that there. There's absolutely tons of impacts in that video, from ranging from habitats being destroyed, the amount of koalas that are being lost, the huge devastating impact to the named settlements that you saw there, the evacuation of people, the fact that some people are refusing to be evacuated because they want to stay to defend their homes. There's loads to talk about there. Don't forget about the economic impacts too. Is Australia going to have to change its policy using coal-fired power stations? Maybe it should, but maybe it won't. These are all really big impacts that come out of this kind of tragedy when they happen, and there are things that you can talk about when you answer your questions. Let's look at some pictures now. Now, as usual, guys, where you see writing on an orange label, then that's a note that you can copy down. So just pause the video and you can copy down the notes. These will go under the heading, what are the impacts of wildfires? So first of all, don't just copy blindly. Make sure you understand what you're writing down. This graphic here shows a timeline across the top with years going by. And you can see that this is 1918 and this is 2019. If you're not good with graphs, then all you need to really look at is the frequency. That means how often there are years that have wildfires in. And you can see, it's quite obvious, the years where there are wildfires are becoming increasingly and increasingly common. Wildfires are becoming more and more common over the last, say, 25 to 30, 40 years, something like that. You could also look at this key down here, which shows you the number of deaths that took place in those fires as a measure of how damaging they were. And you can see that they are becoming increasingly deadly over time. The orange background notes are ones that you can copy, and they give you lots of good detailed impacts. For example, that 34 people died. That would be a social impact to put into your table. This image shows you an area before the fire and after the fire. The bushfire season has destroyed an absolutely massive amount of conservation land. That means land that's deliberately protected because it's particularly beautiful or contains rare species. That's an environmental impact. Famous pictures such as these show examples of the kind of efforts being made to rescue wildlife. You can see this poor koala has been badly burned and this rescuer is trying to save its life. But 500 million animals being killed is a really serious problem. Can the natural ecosystem bounce back from that is a good question, and this is a big environmental impact. Let's not forget that this is a human tragedy as well. People's houses and businesses have been destroyed completely. This is assuming that they have insurance for being burned down in a wildfire, then maybe you can recover, but not everybody will. And for many people, this is really a complete reset to their lives. They'll have lost their savings, they'll have lost their home, they'll have lost their business, and in some sad cases, they've lost family members. This is a genuine tragedy. Here's an excellent case study of the kind of environmental but also economic impact that takes place. You can see a before and after picture of Kangaroo Island, which is known for its animal and plant diversity. It's very beautiful. And you can see these areas of forest that existed prior to the fire, before the fire, and those areas of forest are now completely destroyed. It's an economic impact also because, of course, tourists would like to visit these areas of outstanding natural beauty, and now they can't. There is a global impact as well. This image shows you smoke from the fires being transported around the world, and that contributes towards global pollution, speeding up our already fast contributions towards climate change. So now what you need to do is you need to diamond rank the impacts. I want you to take your table that you've filled in and then choose the 9 impacts that you think that are most important. Now, hopefully you've noted down way more than 9 impacts by this point. It's a challenge, but what you've got to do is, either on your own or with someone else, agree upon what you think the first and most important challenge that you need to try and solve if you were the Australian government is. Then you get to choose the next 2 most important, then the next 3 most important. You might find that actually choosing the last important one is one of the toughest jobs. But nonetheless, try to put your impacts into a priority order of which ones you would tackle first. There's no right or wrong answer to this. It's very much a thinking skill, but think sensibly, as clearly some problems need tackled before others. It's interesting also to note that this is actually something that somebody would have to do. There is somebody in charge of exactly this kind of decision making, and this is the kind of example of why geography could be a career or a future job for you in your life. Taking this further, a writing task to do on the back of this is to, at a bronze basic level, justify your top number 1 choice. Why did you choose your first impact? Why did you make it the most important one? For silver level, justify your first but also your last choice. Why did you choose your most important and your least important impact? Why are they your first and last choices? And for gold, simply follow the instruction. There is a little sentence structure down here if you're not sure how to get started. I gave name your impact priority 1 because. So your notes should now contain a table of 3 columns, and should contain these 9 prioritized impacts, and then at least 1 sentence justifying one of your impacts. Now this is the exam question that we're going to do based upon this unit of work. This is something that you may have done in class, but certainly it's going to be a skill that you would be assessed in your test, and that's to explain the impacts of the forest fires in the country you've studied. If you can get 5 or more, then that's the gold standard. The thing to revise here is the sentence structure. Tell me what the impact is, and then tell me why it happens. So you need to name the impact and then use the word because to explain why it happens. So for example, rare species of koalas are lost, that's the impact, because their habitat is destroyed. If you look back into your class notes, you should see that you've completed this activity. Okay, and that's us at the end of the Australia Wildfires Impacts lesson. On the back of this, you'll be likely to be asked to make a campaign poster to advertise to the world why this is a really important issue for us to solve. And these are some final questions that are good to consider and maybe discuss with your folks at home. What was the worst impact of the fires? Was it the lives were lost? Was it the animals were killed? Is it the long-term impact that this is it's not going to be fixed quickly and that nature won't recover for a very long time? Maybe you could talk about what is the most surprising impact of the fire. Or for a gold level discussion, are we to blame or is this just a natural phenomenon? You decide, but try and give a reason why. Okay, hope you found that interesting and I'll see you in class.